started with the dreams. At first, they were nothing more than fleeting nightmares. Dark figures standing at the foot of her bed, whispers echoing in her ears. Emily dismissed them as nothing more than pregnancy-induced anxieties. After all, carrying a child was supposed to be stressful, right? But as the months passed, the dreams became more vivid, more real. The figures in the shadows were no longer just standing there. They were watching her, whispering things she couldn't understand. Some nights, she woke up gasping for air, her hands instinctively clutching her growing belly, as if something inside her was reacting to the terror. Then, the noises began. At first, it was subtle, a creak of the floorboards when no one was walking, the occasional knock on the walls. But soon, it escalated. Doors slammed shut on their own. The baby monitor, still packed away in a box, started emitting static sounds, even though it wasn't plugged in. A dark presence filled the house, something she couldn't see but could feel, an oppressive weight that made her skin crawl. Her husband, Mark, tried to assure her it was all in her head. "Babe, you're exhausted. Pregnancy messes with your mind," he said, rubbing her back. But deep down, Emily knew better. Something was wrong. At her next ultrasound, the technician's face went pale. She studied the screen, her hands shaking as she adjusted the probe. Is, everything okay?" Emily asked nervously. The technician hesitated. "Your baby's heartbeat. It's unusual." Emily's stomach tightened. "Unusual how?" I need to get the doctor," she said, and hurried out of the room. Alone, Emily stared at the black and white screen. The shape of her child was there, perfectly formed, but something wasn't right. The heartbeat sounded too fast, almost layered, like more than one pulse echoing at once. The doctor entered, his face unreadable. "Emily, have you been experiencing anything unusual?" She hesitated. Should she tell him about the whispers, the shadows, the way she felt something moving inside her, even when the baby should have been still? "No," she lied. The doctor exchanged a look with the technician before finally nodding. "We'll keep monitoring you closely. For now, just try to get some rest." Weeks passed, and the feeling of dread only worsened. Mark had started sleeping on the couch, claiming Emily tossed and turned too much at night. But she knew the truth. He was afraid. Afraid of the whispers he pretended not to hear. Afraid of the way the house felt colder each passing night. One night she woke up to the sound of static. It was coming from the baby monitor, the one that wasn't even plugged in. A cold sweat covered her skin as she sat up in bed. The static was layered with something else, a voice. "Mommy?" Emily's breath hitched in her throat. Her heart pounded. She reached for the monitor, her fingers trembling. "Hello?" The static crackled before the voice returned, distorted and low. "It's almost time," Emily screamed. Mark rushed into the room, eyes wide. "What happened?" "The monitor," she gasped, pointing at it. It spoke to me." Mark frowned, grabbing the device. "Emily, it's not even plugged in." He turned it over in his hands, showing her the empty battery slot. She shook her head violently. "I heard it. A child's voice. It said..." Before she could finish, a piercing cry echoed through the house. A baby's cry. Mark's face turned white. "Oh, God." Emily clutched her belly, feeling something shift, unnaturally, inside her. The baby was kicking, but it wasn't normal. It felt like something was clawing at her from the inside. As the days passed, the baby's movements became erratic. Emily would wake up with bruises along her stomach, as if something inside her was pressing too hard against her skin. She couldn't eat. She couldn't sleep. The whispers grew louder. She started seeing things, shadows that darted across the room when she blinked. The baby's room, fully furnished and waiting for his arrival, felt colder than the rest of the house. One night, she walked in and saw the rocking chair moving on its own, a faint lullaby playing from the music box, even though no one had wound it up. Then came the night of the birth. Emily didn't remember much of the labor, just pain. Blinding, unbearable pain that felt as if something inside her was trying to tear her apart. The doctors spoke in hushed voices. The machines beeped erratically. She felt something go cold, then hot, then cold again, and then silence. Emily's vision blurred. A distant, muffled cry reached her ears. But it wasn't like any baby's cry she had ever heard. It was guttural, deep, wrong. She turned her head weakly, trying to see her child, but the nurses were backing away from the bassinet, their faces pale, their hands shaking. What's wrong?" Emily rasped. One of the nurses whispered, "God help us." They let her hold the baby once, just once. And when she did, she wished she never had. The infant's eyes, dark as the void, stared back at her. They weren't human. They weren't innocent. And when he smiled, the lights flickered. The room went ice cold. And something she couldn't see, whispered in her ear, "He's finally here." Mark refused to see the baby. The hospital staff avoided them. No one spoke of the things they heard at night, the laughter echoing from the nursery, the way the baby's bassinet moved on its own. A week later, they were sent home. But Emily knew, deep in her bones, that nothing was normal. She never slept. The baby never cried like a normal child. And at night, when Mark pretended to be asleep, Emily would hear something else entirely. Laughter, not a baby's, a man's, coming from the crib. She couldn't do it anymore. She couldn't pretend. One night, she took the baby, wrapped him in a blanket, and walked toward the woods behind their house. The cold wind howled, carrying whispers that called her name. She didn't stop until she reached the river. She held the child close, looking down at his unnatural, too dark eyes. He smiled at her, teeth too sharp for a newborn. "Mommy," he whispered, "I knew you'd take me home." Emily screamed. She let go. The water swallowed him whole. Silence. And then, laughter, echoing all around her, in the trees, in the wind, in her own mind. She turned to run, but the laughter followed her. A shadow loomed behind her, whispering in a voice she had heard before. "You can't get rid of me, Mommy." The last thing Emily saw was darkness swallowing her whole. And then she woke up. The nightmare wasn't over. It had only just begun.